In the name of the Father, and of the Holy Spirit, God is one. Amen. It always does a little bit of buffering just as I get to the word Amen there. Right, good morning to Stella and Dino and Carl. Yeah, a cloudy morning in now. It was beautifully sunny a little while ago. So that's rather vexing. Good morning, Vicky. Calling me Father P, which is what many of my parishioners call me as well. Which was funny. Right. So, and I've just heard the red arrows go roaring over as well. So that's interesting. Now then, today we're going to be looking at the last few verses of chapter 11. Before that, let's just see who else is here. Natalia. Oh, Stella says you can't hear me. Can Carl, can you hear me? You must be able to. Stella, you must have your sound switched off or something. I checked the microphone earlier on. Yeah, you can hear me. Okay. Right. Thank you, Christine, as well, and Carl. Ahmed. Right. Here we go then. Let's see whether Stella will work out whether she not needs to switch on her things. Okay. Lots of people can hear me. So good morning, George and Christine as well. Here we go. So you have Caiaphas saying that it's better for one person to die for the nation than the whole nation perish. And by doing so, he doesn't realize it, but he's actually speaking prophetically. So, verse 53, then from that day on, they plotted to put him to death. Therefore, Jesus no longer walked openly among the Jews, but went from there into the country near the wilderness, to a city called Ephraim, and there remained with his disciples. And the Passover of the Jews was near, and many went from the country to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. Then they sought Jesus and spoke among themselves as they stood in the temple. What do you think? That he will come to the feast? Now, both the chief priests and the Pharisees had given a command that if anyone knew where he was, they should report it, that they might seize him. Okay. Good morning to Judith as well. I can see you now. Right, okay. So the Jewish authorities have already decided these people who are meant to be exemplars in keeping the law have decided that they're going to break one of the more important laws, one of the 10 commandments. There's 613 of them altogether, and there are 10 of them which they sort of sit higher than the other ones. And one of those is you shall not kill, you shall not commit murder. And they themselves are planning to commit this murder. And who are they? They are the Sanhedrin, the people who are there to run the country and to administer the Jewish faith. And as a result, in verse 54, we discover that Jesus is no longer walking openly among the Jews, as it says. He can't go back to Judea. He can't be in and around Jerusalem. His life is threatened. And so is the life of his disciples. So the Lord decides to move. And he goes to this place called Ephraim. Nobody knows exactly where that is. Eusebius says it's about 13 miles away from Jerusalem in a northeast direction. There's somebody called Jerome who says about 30 miles away, also in a similar sort of direction. But it's north and it's east. And whether it is near or far away from Jerusalem doesn't really matter. It's far enough. Let's say it's 13 miles away. That is a day's journey. And that, amazingly, is enough to keep the Lord safe. I guess nowadays, a day's journey would be from here to Edinburgh or somewhere like that, here being Lincoln. And would just about keep me out of harm's way if there were local enemies around Lincoln who were wanting to do me in. But it was enough to be safe. Now, there are three interesting things about this. What does it say what he does? Number one, he goes to this place in the wilderness, Ephraim, and thirdly, remains there with his disciples. So let's start off with the last one. He remains there with his disciples. While he's there in a place of comparative safety, he's able to carry on teaching them and explaining what he's there for. They don't understand at the time, but later on they'll come to understand. And we know, for example, that there are many things that the Lord said that are not in the Gospels. St. John tells us that at the end. And we also have quotations in St. Paul, for example, it is more blessed to give than to receive, which doesn't appear anywhere at all in the Gospels. And yet, St. Paul tells us the Lord said it. Okay, so that is an indication the Lord taught them many other things. And these are the things that we get from the wider tradition, okay? The wider tradition of the church. Stella's sorted out her listening problems. I was going to write to her and say, well, switch on your headphones or something, but it turned out to be Zoom. Okay, so that is an important thing. The Lord is teaching lots of things. Now, some of those things, I reckon, come up in the rest of John's Gospel. There are many things that nobody was there to hear. So in the great long high priestly prayer of the Lord, as he calls it later on, all of that was done by the Lord, by himself, without any witnesses. So how do they know what he's praying? They know what he's praying because they know the sort of thing that he said. And it'd be at a time like this, when he's with them out with his disciples, continuing with them in a sort of seminary for them. Okay? The next thing is, where is he? He's in the wilderness. And in the wilderness, like the Jewish people in the wilderness for 40 years, the Lord going out into the wilderness to be tempted 3 times, this is a period of preparation. We ourselves are in the wilderness at the moment, the wilderness of Great Lent, and that is the preparation for Great Week and Pascha. So we have to have that sort of thing in our mind as well, a time of preparation. And then thirdly, the place that he actually goes to. He goes to this place called Ephraim. Now, Ephraim means fruitfulness. There's some who say it means something even stronger than that. It means double fruitfulness, really big fruitfulness going on there. And it's the opposite, really, of what we find in Mark chapter 11, where the Lord looks at that fig tree and curses it because it is not fruitful, and it then withers, even though it's not time for fruit. The Lord has found Jerusalem to be barren. The best they can do from fruitfulness there is stoop down, pick up stones to hurl at him and to kill him. So he goes off near the wilderness to a place called Fruitfulness. And the fathers of the church say that the Lord will then look for other new disciples away from Jerusalem who are going to be more fruitful. And that, of course, as far as the Jewish people looking for a Messiah is concerned, is absolutely contrary to their expectation. The fathers continue to say that may we ourselves, far away from Jerusalem, be those fruitful disciples, those Ephraimites, who are going to bring fruit towards God. Okay. And finally, in that same verse, in verse 55 rather, and the Passover of the Jews was near, and many went from the country up to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. So Passover is on its way. And that year, Passover took place on Friday the 3rd of April, AD 33. There is a certain amount of discussion about exactly which year it was. But if we stick to the year 33, then Good Friday actually takes place on a Friday, and the resurrection can take place 3 days later on the Sunday. Okay, Now, it's interesting, isn't it? Number one, in most of the synoptic gospels and in our tradition and the way that we celebrate this before Pascha, we start off on Saturday saying it's Lazarus Saturday. And then the next day is the entry into Jerusalem. And then we go through a certain number of days until we get to the crucifixion. Then there's Saturday on which the Lord rests, then there's Sunday. And John is actually giving us a different timetable here. So he has, instead of having Lazarus, entry, teaching in the temple, and so on, that first part of that is in a different order. Okay, we start off with the raising of Lazarus, and then the Lord goes off to Ephraim for an unspecified amount of time. Now, we last saw the Lord, as it were, raising Lazarus, but before then, we saw him, and it was winter, and now it is spring. So it was in October, the last time we see the Lord. Now it is in the spring, sometime March or April, perhaps. But the Lord goes off to Ephraim for an unspecified amount of time, maybe as long as a couple of months, 2 or 3 months, maybe 40 days, who knows, we don't know. But it's interesting that the traditional order, the order of the Synoptic Gospels, is actually changed by John. He puts in this extra little detail that he goes off and he hides himself in this place of fruitfulness for a time. We don't know what's in John's mind at this moment. Probably this is more historical. If we give people time to whip up their hatred of the Lord as well and do more planning, and it fits in a more natural way than the Lord raising Lazarus, going into Jerusalem the next day, and so on. You'll notice also with Lazarus in John, it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that in John that he's doing that miracle on a Saturday, which is something else that irritates people in the synoptics. Okay, so there's a bit of background there. The next thing is the Jewish people, they have to go, if you're a male, you have to go up to Jerusalem for this particular festival. And people from all over the area would have gone up there. Maybe people didn't go every year, but they were meant to go every year. And certainly all the people in the vicinity, they all went up to Jerusalem. And while they were there, they purified themselves. A bit like us going to confession before Pascha or during Lent or something like that, or before a major feast. Now imagine that it is coming up to Pascha and I go to confession. And the one thing that I failed to mention is that I am intending to murder somebody. Then of what use is my confession? The answer is, of course, of absolutely no use at all. Because if you fail to mention that you're planning to do an evil deed, then your purification cannot happen because it's still there in your heart. If I decide to go to confession and I decide that on the way home I'm going to turn up at the butcher's and give them a good smacking for selling me bad meat, then again, my confession is not going to be worth very much. I was obviously brought up in the wrong country there. I can remember those very things happening where I grew up. If the shopkeeper sold you something duff, you took it back to him and you literally rubbed his face in it and gave him a good beating up, and the whole village would turn out to beat up the person as well. I told a story about this with our own family and a loaf of bread, which was rather embarrassing because the poor man had done nothing wrong, let alone the fact he got beaten up. Anyway, so these people have gone to Jerusalem to purify themselves, but as they are purifying themselves, and that would involve having certain washings, some small sacrifices, quite often cutting their hair short, shaving it all off, and making preparation for this feast of liberation and being led by God out of oppression, in their own hearts, they're planning to oppress Christ and his movement and the disciples, and far from being led by him, they're planning to lead him to destruction. So you can see whether they are doing exactly the opposite of everything that the feast itself really calls you to do. When they came out of Egypt, they're given the law, and they're intending to break this law, but celebrate it at the same time. Okay? In verse 56, they're looking for Jesus. They're looking for him. They themselves are in the temple, and they're wondering, is he going to come up or not? And they're looking for him with evil intent. Rather than looking for him to see what they could learn, they're looking for him because they wish to put him to death. Do you think he's going to come to the feast? And all this sort of thing. And they're speaking amongst themselves, murmuring amongst themselves. And that idea of murmuring again takes us back to Exodus and the original Passover, where having come out of Egypt, having been liberated from slavery, having been taken towards the Holy Land, they then argue amongst themselves and murmur amongst themselves, complaining about God. So in the end, God lets them stay in the wilderness for 40 years to prepare them to come into the promised land itself. Okay, St. Alcuin says about this that we pray that Christ will sanctify our feast. There go the red arrows. But they were praying that at their feast they might be able to kill him. Now, it's unlikely, they think, that the Lord will come, because surely he cannot be so foolish as to turn up at this feast. Well, we know that he turns up in grand style in the end, but they're thinking that they're going to have to go looking for him secretly. And because of this, they have sent out people all over the place as spies, the chief priests and the Pharisees, who incidentally hated each other, but they were, their common enemy made them friends, at least in this manner, had given command that if anyone knew where the Lord was, that person should report it, that they might arrest him. Okay, so that's enough for today. We've got to the end of that particular passage. Let's see what it is that people are saying. So Judith is getting a later notification. Tony is in a nice, sunny, becalmed Ireland. That's good, because slowly it'll come our way. Good morning, Margaret and Andrew and Gary. And say good morning to Paula as well. I guess that she's hearing me. I owe her a couple of responses on my telephone, but I've not looked at my telephone for a day or two. Good morning, Christos. Good morning, Beverly and Tatiana. Stella's had problems with her Zoom. Good morning, Maria. Good morning, John from Melbourne. This is good evening for you. Good evening. It's good evening to people in the United States as well. Hello, Jovan. Bright sadness, second week of Great Lent. Yes, that bright sadness is an important idea in Orthodoxy. If you look at an icon of a saint, you'll see there's a bright sadness in their faces as well. Bright because they are saved, they're with Christ. Sad because they have to witness our own sin. George, what does the number 3 mean? AD 33, 3 days, 30 years. I don't think it means anything there at all. 6 is more important. 6 really meant failure. 7 was the perfect number. 8 was the number that took you beyond perfection, which is why it is that Sunday is often called the 8th day. 6 was failure, and therefore 666 meant failure upon failure upon failure. Harry, when was the death penalty in Judaism fulfilled? I'm not sure, Harry, what you mean by that. And in West London, George is enjoying a summer's morning. Well, it was beautiful here earlier on, but it's gone cold and miserable. So I hope things stay nice and sunny for everybody else. I, Oh, I see what Harry's talking about. Yeah. He's offering service to God. I think they knew very well that they were not fulfilling the commandment, but they had got their eyes fixed on the wrong thing. It's like I said before, there is nothing so vile as churchianity. Churchianity will lead people, or religiosity. Churchianity and religiosity will lead people to do utterly evil things in the name of their religion or the church or something like that. Utterly vile. Whereas somebody who is attached to God will have automatically in their heart, whatever religion they are, any religion at all, anybody who is attached to God will only be thinking of their neighbor's good, of wanting maybe to correct people, to take on their suffering, to suffer vicariously for them even, to sacrifice themselves for that other person. And therefore, people that you see in that way, who are giving themselves, they might have any religion, no religion at all. They might not be bound by anything, whatever, except for love. And in their love, they'll offer themselves to other people constantly, consistently. And that then is the truth. Now, in this particular case, the majority of the Jewish people, they did all their sacrifice and everything else because they love God. And even we see within the pages of the gospel, people like Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea and others like that, even Gamaliel in Acts of the Apostles. They're clearly good people wanting to do what is right because they have an understanding of God. They know what God is really about, and what they're doing is that they are offering themselves to God. Okay? Similarly, when I was growing up in a Muslim society, I was only ever shown great hospitality and kindness and decency by the people who were there. And my younger brother and I, who were aged 7 and 8, could wander around our village with absolute impunity because the people of Baklan, Fabrika Baklan, they loved each other, they loved God, they loved all their visitors and everybody else as well. More recently, the Taliban have taken over, and these people are not attached to God. They're attached to religiosity, and therefore they have seen these things that are nothing to do with God, and they attach importance to them that God will never attach to anything. Same with these Pharisees and the Sanhedrin. They saw their temple, they saw their acts of worship, they saw their own power, they saw their culture as being above anything that God might tell them. And in that way, they overcome the law, which was about love and about finding yourself close to God. And they make the law God. They make the prophets into God and not God. And therefore, in a way, they are idolatrous. Okay? Have I ever gone back to visit old friends in Afghanistan? Currently, I'm quite fond of the attachment that is between my head and my neck. If I went back to Fabrika Baglan, because as I said, it's still run by the Taliban, my life expectancy would be more in hours than even days. Okay? So no, it will not be a possibility. There'll be plenty of people who would remember us and my parents as good people and would probably look after us, but it would be bad for them as well. My father did a tremendous amount of good in that area. I don't know how much of that still exists. I think probably very little. Okay, so yeah, I don't think they were even thinking about the commandments. They were thinking about their own survival. It's difficult to be in touch with people in Afghanistan. Okay, so that I think is what is going on there. It's always important to put love above everything else. You start off with that. You keep that in your mind. Christos, was my father a teacher? Yes, he was. He was into what's called non-formal adult education. I'll let you go and look that up. So there's formal education, like you might get in classroom. There is informal education, and there's non-formal education. And my father was a specialist in non-formal adult education, and that was really quite a thing. And once people get that idea, then they start working with that sort of education in a big way. Very important. People like Ivan Illich and people like that, they had the right sort of idea there. Things like sayings like the medium is itself the message. This is where you need to. It's like in a parish or in a school. Um, the main thing that anybody is teaching in a school is how to be an adult. It's preparation for adult life, as they used to say. And the teachers then model what it's like to be an adult. Okay, that's really important. And in a parish, the parishioners should model what it's like to be a Christian to other people. So when non-Christians arrive, they see from the activities and the behavior of those people around them what it's really like to follow God. That actually every and any rule can be bent. All of them can be. Like at Pascha, the saying is at Pascha there are no rules. Everything goes. And you might limit yourself because what you want to do is express your love for each other and for God. Okay? Explanation, thank God. Thank you, Christine. Clear the clutter from religion. Religiosity is horrible. Churchianity is vile. Christianity is fine because you are concentrating on Christ. And concentrating on Christ is what we need to do. If you concentrate on Christ, you'll find an awful lot of people who go to church will find you most unpleasant. Work out ways of getting rid of you from their congregation. Whereas if you concentrate on churchianity, you'll be tremendously, wonderfully medium of the message. Oh, Marshall McClure. Yeah. Illich was small is beautiful, isn't he? That's another thing my father used to like very much indeed. You're quite right. It was Marshall McLuhan. Yeah. Good. Right. Well, Dad used to train people, amongst other things, to do very simple operations on animals, or to recognize the top 10 diseases amongst animals in an area, or to be able to recognize the top 10 parasites, that sort of thing. And so they became like barefoot vets. They weren't fully trained vets, but on the other hand, if you got onto the top 10 diseases in an area, then disease number 11 was relatively unimportant. Okay? We need to do the same sort of idea in Christianity as well. We concentrate on the things that are really important, and the other things, well, they can wait. They don't matter too much. Okay? Those who fasted, even at the end, rejoice. Yeah? Even those who have just turned up, they can rejoice too. The table is fully laden, as St. John Chrysostom says. Okay, right, God bless you. Your prayers, God willing, tomorrow.